Very cheap. So wine number 3, we're back in the Champagne region, a little bit younger, not a late disgorge style, so it spent probably half as much time on lees, or close enough to half as much time on lees, so there is a little bit of an example of cork age there as well.
And it's pretty much a 50-50 blend of
Yes,
Chardonnay and
50%
Pinot?
Pinot, 50% Chardonnay, 2004 vintage in Champagne. It was for half of the vintage, for all intensive purposes, was a write-off, and then they had this amazing Indian summer that saved it. And what you find is these wines that are coming from 04, which is getting more and more plaudits as time goes on, are racy, fine and elegant. And certainly coming off the back of the heatwave year of 03, you do see this elegance coming through in this wine quite strongly. I guess we can't compare apples with apples here,
No.
but it's certainly interesting to look at that approach and also the changing climate, I'd say.
It's funny when you talk about awards, because my wine that's in here was runner-up for Champion Wine of Show in the Sparkling Wine Show last year, but sadly Ed voted for it and I voted against it. So
Because?
Well, when you're in wine shows, you've got to get stock over, so
No, seriously, when you're judging wines, you're paying on style and quality. And I think that's an important thing about judging, that you don't have one favourite style and always pay that. You've got to look at the range of wines that's in front of you, and they will be very different in style. And as a winemaker judging, they may not be the style that you make, but you have to be appreciative of a range of wines.
and you just can't look for your own wines anyway. One, it would be completely wrong and unfair and you wouldn't get asked to judge very much.
Yeah.
Two, you'd tie yourself in knots and get
so-
so confused you wouldn't be able to assess anything anymore.
Yeah, if you go looking for your own wine, it's usually suicide.
Yeah.
You'll find someone else's.
that's a great segue, Karina, in terms of bringing up shows and medals and awards, because we've got to the bonus wine now, and it's a 2000 vintage EJ Carr from the House of Arras. That's not every day you get to meet a man who's actually got his name and initials on a bottle of wine, so that's, thank you very much for coming along today, Ed.
That's right.
And talk us through this wine, its plaudits that it's got throughout the Australian Wine Show system. Also, where it sits in terms of price point in relation to, I guess, other wines in Australia, and how special, and the small production level, I think, is quite fascinating as well.
With this one, calling it late disgorged is actually our philosophy for that is that the wine actually is the second disgorge run of that. So we produce, as the question was asked before, a grand vintage wine. We release that at 7 years on lees, but we hold a percentage of that back on longer on lees. So a small volume we hold for a minimum of 10 years on lees, and we disgorge that wine, and that's the late disgorge. So this is the late disgorge grand vintage. So as you can see with the first two wines, which I think are stunning in their own rights actually, and very different, but to take sparkling wine to global quality, I think age is such a major factor of that, and this wine evolved from wines we kept in the museum under Terrage, and just started to think, well, maybe we can turn that into a commercial product and produce something that we felt was the best that we could make. So 10.
What is the grape?
This is Chardonnay predominant. It's about 60% Chardonnay, 40% Pinot. And it has had a 10 years on lees. So 10 years on lees, about a year on cork, and aiming just to build that yeasty, toasty breadiness, which is part of our style. Price-wise, sort of north of about 130, depending where you buy it. Volume-wise,
In a bottle shop, not on a restaurant wine list.
yeah, I did say north.
Come on.
And
Uh,
every room at Merca Hotel, is that right?
Yes.
So this, along with a lot of these wines, is for Australian Clover Hill, doing a lot of this as well. Is uncharted waters, I guess, but commercially for Australian sparkling wine. But we're starting to think that there's a niche in the market for top end Australian bubbles. So
Can we draw you on how many bottles are made of this particular wine?
you can. That vintage was 170 dozen.
170 dozen. How many bottles are made in dozen terms of Dom Perignon?
Well, that,
As a rough idea from what you've heard.
about 150,000 dozen.
150,000 dozen.
But Dom Perignon is a bit out there on its own. For all prestige cuvées, isn't it? Yeah.
So the scale that the Tasmanian guys work on with their prestige cuvées is so much smaller than the famous wines from Champagne. Cristal, Dom Perignon, absolutely, the Tasmanian guys are dwarfed by their production methods. So you've got much greater hands-on control over what's happening there, don't you?
You do, and also just the costs involved as well, because like anything else, economy of scale comes into play with sparkling wine, which you can see especially in a region like Carver, which is still a traditional method, but they're just so big they can make those wines quite cheaply. And I guess that's something we're constantly trying to talk to people about, is we're really selling Tasmanian sparkling wine at the best price that we can, because it's really quite cool, it's really quite difficult to grow grapes, and as you've heard Ed and I say today, that there's really quite a long time in the winery as well. So, these wines here, 2000, 2001, we started paying for the grapes and the glass, and we're only selling them now, so not the best cash flow business to go into.
No tax, but
no.
just purely
Just
assets.
the cost of keeping them in assets.
You've built an asset that you're not getting any return on. I'd just like to go back to those first two ones again, because I think we're rushing through those a little bit, and I just think they're great examples of house style, and we've touched on that before about judging and how do you judge, and I think those two are just, walk-in gold medal top end wines, but they're very different in style, and just showing Chardonnay with age, and Chardonnay just goes that toasty butter mushroom thing with that oyster character.
Yeah.
And I think aged Chardonnay, particularly with a bit of oak, has that lovely fresh oyster sort of character to it as well.
And that's where, for me, especially with the Clover Hill, which is 100% single vineyard Pipers River, you start to see what I alluded to earlier. The thing that characterises both aged Pipers River sparklings and even aged Pipers River Chardonnays is that real crushed oyster shell, iodide, seaweedy character, which maybe doesn't sound that pleasant a term for wine, but I actually see it as a very positive thing. And it really, if you know that character in this region, it's one of those ones you pick up and it just speaks of the region immediately for me.
It's interesting that they're both 100% Chardonnay, but the others, it's almost a Neville Reed compared to the other
Has the Clover had any oak?
Yes,
Yeah.
but just 10%.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I was wondering if some of the colour was oak aging
Yeah.
of the base wine, but Green says
Yeah.
10%. But different vineyards, different winemaking style. But I think the interesting thing about all these old wines is they're so fresh and bright.
Yeah.
They're just lovely, salivating, bright, acid wines, which to me is the mark of a top-end sparkling wine.
Yeah. It does. What's the corkage on yours?
About eight months.
Yeah.
The wine's only
Okay.
commercially released this week. So that's about 8 months on cork.
Yeah, so I think the oak and wood in sparkling is an interesting topic. Anyway, it's not something traditionally many people in Australia have used. It's something that's always been part of the Clover Hill house style. And it is something that is part of a lot of traditional champagne styles. The best example I can think of would be Bollinger, that people would see, that you really see that richness and the weight rather than necessarily an overt oaky smell like you see on a red wine, because you're using older oak.
I have a question. Where do you sell all your wine?
Where do we sell them? They're pretty widely available, the Clover Hill vintage. This 01 Blanc de Blanc isn't released yet. You can also order them off our website as well.
Do you sell Clover Hill Dan Murphy's? Because that's where a lot of people go.
Just the vintage. So any specialty products like the Blanc de Blanc and our rosé are not available in any of the chains, but the vintage wine is in Dan Murphy's. The new Tasmanian cuvée will be independent retailers and largely on-premise retail as well. Well, you do get a bit of frost, but my site actually gets no frost at all because we've chosen our site well. Also, we're about 10k as the crow flies from the ocean, and we're right on the top of a hill, so we're planted down a hill. So at the top, we're 300 metres above sea level. At the bottom, we're 170 metres. And the best way I find to describe to people what the temperature is like, unfortunately, I catch lots of 6 a.m. flights from Launceston, which is about a 50-minute drive from where I live on the vineyard. So usually I leave home at about 4:15, when you'd expect it to be pretty cold in Tasmania at this time of year. It's never below zero, according to my car, when I leave my house. I'm at the top of a hill. I drive down the hill to get to the next town. You drop 3 degrees just to do that. You drop down another big hill to get to Lilydale, and you drop another 3 or 4 degrees. Yeah. So that comes back to what I was saying about Tasmania. It's not all the same.
Yeah, good too.
So site selection is just the major part of it. You've got to do your work on your vineyard patches before you plant them to make sure that you're going to pick. Well, you can't ever pick frost-free zones, but you can reduce the risk a huge amount.
We don't get that much hail.
Not so much as the mainland, actually.
No.
The Yarra Valley and the East Coast tend to get more hail. You don't tend to get that cyclone weather coming across. No. It usually fades out by the time it gets across the water. But there are frost areas, and a few of the vineyards that I work with actually have frost protection on them, which usually involve sprinklers, quite high volume water sprinklers that come on. They're set to a temperature, and if the temperature drops below a certain point, you basically put water up, which just absorbs, warms up the vine. Or you can have frost fans, which they're just like the reverse of a sort of green energy sort of a fan that like a wind turbine in reverse that actually drives and rotates and pulls warmer air from a higher level down to the vineyard. In some areas, I've even seen helicopters used for frost protection. When the temperature gets low, you get a helicopter in that hovers and sucks in warmer air.
I think nothing works quite as well as the sprinklers and a bit of water.
No, water does work exceptionally well.
Mm. I think though too, like I'm going to be like Ed and come back to those first two wines. When I was saying about what my favourites were and what I drink, I could quite happily sit somewhere and drink those first two wines at any time.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a Blanc fan and a Chardonnay predominant fan, I guess, and those wines are just going to age out further on cork and just get richer. They'll be solid wines, I think.
So going back to the question on colour earlier.
Back to the colour question.
We're trying to get to it.
Okay, so rosés. So there's a number of ways you can make a rosé sparkling wine, because of course that's a characteristic of sparkling wine on the whole, that most of them are white wines that you're incorporating red grapes in. And I think that's one of the things that they're pretty confident they can attribute to Dom Perignon, is working on the process for removing the colour.
Yeah.